Welcome to my channel. My name is Man the Wall. I talk about history, politics, and whatever else I feel like that day. Since on this channel I often talk about historical revisionism, I figured today I'd talk about an example of historical revisionism that still holds a large degree of political relevance in my view. This, of course, is the Dolchstoss theory, or the notion that Germany was not actually defeated during the First World War, but instead was betrayed from within in 1918 by Republican politicians, socialists, and of course, those damn shifty Jews. This theory became incredibly widespread following the creation of the Weimar Republic and was instrumental in creating the conditions for Nazi Germany to rise. While the legacy of thought it created alone is enough to condemn it as far as I'm concerned, today I want to also focus briefly on why this theory didn't just have reprehensible consequences for millions of people all across Europe, but is also just plain not true. So let's start with some background. In mid-1917, the war was going pretty well for Germany. The new Russian provisional government, under the rule of Alexander Kerensky, launched a disastrous summer offensive against the Central Powers, which saw large-scale mutinies and seemed to imply that the Russian army had utterly lost the will to fight. And with mutinies breaking out in France, it seemed as if France and Britain would capitulate soon after. But then, the German army did something incredibly stupid. Well, really two things. They continued their policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, and sent a telegram to Mexico asking them to invade the United States. And doing that made the United States very, very angry. So angry, in fact, they decided to join the war on the side of the Entente, with the first American troops arriving in France during June. With the entrance of the United States, the tables were turned against Germany, and it became clear to most German generals that the only way to win the war was an all-out offensive to try to knock France out of the war. And in the spring of 1918, they attempted such. However, due to a number of factors, such as the fact that troops were unable to carry the food and ammunition necessary for such an endeavor, the fact that the government was unable to distribute these resources in time, and the fact that most of the land they were able to take was strategically worthless and difficult to defend, all the channel ports and the railway to Amiens being heavily guarded by the Allies. With American troops coming in droves, the Allies launched the 100 Days Offensive, which saw Germany lose all of its territory that it had won during the war. That, along with the collapse of the other Central Powers, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire, forced Germany to surrender. But to many in Germany, this explanation for defeat was not acceptable, so they came up with a conspiracy theory as for why it was so. Namely, that Germany didn't actually lose the war on the battlefield, but was rather betrayed the vast conspiracy of Jews, Marxists, and other dastardly characters. Many people, for example, said that the strikes by predominantly left-leaning ammunition and metal workers against the war from late January to early February 1918, which they said was organized by the Jews, because of course they did, was responsible for Germany losing the spring offensive. There are a couple problems with this, though. For one, these strikes took place more than a month before the actual spring offensive, meaning that the Germans had plenty of time to make up for the lost material. Two, the strike only lasted 5 days and was soon after crushed, so it was unlikely that this alone was enough to destroy the entire offensive. Three, none of this gets at the heart of why the spring offensive failed, namely poor planning and distribution of supplies, and the generals having no real endgame as far as what they wanted besides just don't lose. Four, even if they did manage to launch an offensive that was more successful, anything besides a full-blown sweep into Paris probably would have lost them the war, and with the United States sending more and more men into World War I by the day, that wasn't very likely, and even if they were somehow miraculously able to sweep Paris and win the war, somehow, without that strike taking place, which, keep in mind, is highly unlikely, that still doesn't mean they somehow didn't lose the war, or would have won if they had just held on a little bit longer. And for six, none of this proves some ridiculous JQ conspiracy about the Jews betraying Germany, rather than just people striking because they were sick of the war. And on the subject of that, you can imagine, given that this was Germany in the 1920s, the stab in the back myth with a fairly heavy dosage of anti-Semitism. Some of this was stemmed from the fact that many of the anti-Kaiser left-wing movements within Germany were led by Jews, particularly in Munich during the creation of the Bavarian Socialist Republic. However, given the fact that Munich had the second largest number of Jews in all of Germany, and the fact that Jews tend to be disproportionately well educated, as education is highly valued in Jewish culture, thus more politically literate, it seems as if those factors likely play a much bigger role in Jewish leadership in left-wing circles, and also, the fact that the Kaiser and Imperial Germany in general were rather anti-Semitic than some grand conspiracy. As well, according to a poll done by Imperial Germany, Jews were actually overrepresented in the German armed forces, with up to 100,000 Jews, up to 18% of the Jewish population, serving in the armed forces, and 12,000 losing their lives in the process, more proportionately than any other ethnic, religious, or political group in the country. So if the Jews were secretly plotting to destroy Germany, you'd think less of them would have signed up for the army. And also, why would German Jews want to destroy Germany in the first place? I mean, they live there, they pay taxes there, they were affected by things like unemployment and hyperinflation in the Weimar Republic, same as anyone, even if on average they were a bit wealthier, so they were able to storm it a bit better. So, what's the purpose? So, Why do I bring this common bit of historical revisionism up for analysis in this video? Well, to be honest, I think it speaks to a certain cultural trend that's common in reactionary movements, which is a certain cult of indestructibility. For many of the people who fall into reactionary movements, it's impossible for them to examine their own movements or ideas critically. Their ideas or decisions fail, it can never be a result of their own failures, but rather a vast conspiracy of others. This can take many forms, like, say, for example, how tankies blame the failure of every Marxist-Leninist country solely on Western imperialism, dismiss any criticism of those countries as merely chauvinism from white Western leftists, to the conservative notion that the Vietnam War was not actually lost on the battlefield, but instead in the hearts and minds of Americans, a notion that still persists to this very day. We can even see this recently in the wake of the Capitol Hill riots and the refusal by many to accept the very obvious truth that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. And while the arguments and situations might change, the central fallacy remains intact. I'm Man the Wall, and I'll see you next time.